Trump has made a lot of promises about how he's going to end the gender madness.
On day one, I will revoke Joe Biden's cruel policies on so-called gender-affirming care. I will sign a new executive order instructing every federal agency to cease all programs that promote the concept of sex and gender transition at any age. My Department of Education will inform states and school districts that if any teacher or school official suggests to a child that they could be trapped in the wrong body, they will be faced with severe consequences, including potential civil rights violations. I will ask Congress to pass a bill establishing that the only genders recognized by the United States government are male and female. The bill will also make clear that Title IX prohibits men from participating in women's sports, and we will protect the rights of parents from being forced to allow their minor child to assume a gender which is new and an identity without the parents' consent. We will also investigate whether Big Pharma or others have illegally marketed hormones and puberty blockers which are in no way licensed or approved for this use.
But will he and can he? These are the questions that I explore with Kara Dansky in this interview. Kara is an attorney with an extensive background in criminal justice law and policy. She is also the president of the US chapter of Women's Declaration International and the author of The Abolition of Sex, How the Transgender Agenda Harms Women and Girls, and The Reckoning, How the Democrats and the Left Betrayed Women and Girls. She also appeared on Dr. Phil, where she talked a lot of sense.
Women are female and men are male, and it's okay to say that.
I found this a really interesting chat because Kara is very clued up about various executive orders, court cases, and pieces of legislation. Every time she mentions one of these, I've added a title and a sound effect like this, so you can then check them out for yourselves, and I'll provide an overview at the very end of the interview. Before we dive in, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. If you don't know what to say, just say, "Stop gender madness now." I'm hoping to get to 30,000 subscribers by the end of the year. That might be a bit ambitious, but who knows? We can make it happen, so please do subscribe. You can also support my channel by joining my Patreon or sending me some love via PayPal. Okay, let's go. Hi, Kara. Thank you so much for joining me at such short notice as well.
Hi, thank you. It's really great to talk with you.
Okay, so it's been a big, well, a night for us. Obviously, we woke up with the news. What was it like for you when you saw the results come in and you thought, okay, this is it?
So this result was not at all surprising to me. And it's just very interesting to contrast this morning from a very similar morning in November of 2016. When I woke up after the 2016 election, I basically just went back to bed and stayed there for 3 days. This morning is just different. Many of us saw this coming. So this is absolutely not the outcome that I wanted, but it's utterly unsurprising.
And when you say it's not what you wanted, what would you, obviously you would have liked Kamala to win the election. What would that have been? What opportunities would there have been basically to push back against the gender madness had she gone into office?
Well, I will just say candidly, I did not vote for either candidate. I waited until the absolute last minute yesterday to cast my vote because even though I did not think that Harris and Walz had any intention of walking back their full-throated embrace of so-called gender identity, I wanted to give them every last opportunity to do it. So I waited until the very last minute. I walked into the voting booth and I just wrote in a candidate. There are a lot of Americans who think of themselves as on the political left who voted for this outcome. I could not do it. And I could not do it for many reasons. But the main reason at the end of the day I could not do it is that whatever one thinks of the United States of America, whatever one thinks of its founding, I have tremendous respect for certain institutions, including the office of the presidency. And I could not bring myself to vote for that man for that office. I think he is utterly unfit to serve. So I couldn't vote for him. And at the same time, after spending about 10 years TERFing publicly and being very far down the rabbit hole of so-called gender identity, I couldn't bring myself to vote for her either. So it isn't quite accurate to say that I wanted her to win. What I wanted her to do,
Right.
what I wanted her and the rest of the Democrats to do is knock it off with this complete denial of the material reality of sex, knock it off with Rachel Levine, get him out of office, knock it off with so-called transing of kids, which is, as you know, and everyone, all of us know, a complete medical scandal. I wanted them to back off all of that. And had they done that, I absolutely would have cast my vote for her. But because they didn't, I couldn't.
Right. So you did something that I think in the UK we call you spoiled the ballot.
Yep.
Right. And what did you write on it?
That I don't want to say.
Okay. I mean, I did this the last time. I can only vote in the local elections in the UK because I'm not a UK citizen. But I just wrote on it, lesbians don't have penises, because apparently they do track it. So it's a way of sending some kind of message.
Well, I do know at least a handful of people. I know of at least 12 people who wrote in my name. So that's very flattering.
Wow. Well, it shows that what you're doing is having an impact, even in that kind of way. And 10 years of TERF, that deserves a medal.
Almost.
Really?
Not quite 10. We're close.
So then I was surprised that the result came in so quick, because I checked yesterday and it said it could take a few days and maybe things had to be recounted or they wouldn't be called yet. But quite quickly, he took the swing states, and another 4 years of Trump. Here we are.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. And it really surprised a lot of people how quickly it happened, because most political commentators in the States were saying it was too close to call. Nobody knew what was going to happen. Nobody could predict an outcome. A few people were willing to predict success on either side by a very small margin. But the overwhelming majority of commentators did not predict that it would happen as quickly as it did. So that was one surprising thing to come out of it.
Yes. And I think he's done even better than last time when he was up against Hillary.
Yeah. Harris underperformed Biden 2020 in every U.S. county, every single one.
Wow. And was this a tactical mistake on the, or rather a strategic mistake on the side of the Democrats, because she was never chosen by the Democrats, by the Democratic Party? And some people made a bit of noise about, well, you know, they say they want to protect democracy, but how can you do that if you have someone on the ballot who wasn't even chosen by the party itself?
Yeah, they made a lot of mistakes. One mistake, quite clearly, was covering up the fact that President Biden is not well mentally. They knew that for months, and they didn't tell the American people. And a lot of rank and file Democrats are furious at them for that reason alone. And you're absolutely right. Another reason is that they put Kamala Harris on the ballot as the presidential candidate effectively without a primary. And a lot of people are really angry at them for that as well.
Okay. And I've seen her in some interviews where she doesn't actually really, I mean, most politicians don't answer questions. I think that's the whole point of being a politician. From the few clips that I've seen, she doesn't seem to be talking a lot of sense. And it's always like, oh, Trump this, Trump that. And it's like, well, you've been in power for 4 years, your party. So why do you keep saying about Trump this, Trump that?
That is actually a bit of a mystery to me, because she's not dumb, you know.
No. Well, yeah, I think so.
She has held office in one way or another for decades now, and she knows how to talk policy. So I have been a bit mystified by her performance in interviews where you're absolutely right. She just talks gibberish. Now, part of the problem is that, and this may sound very strange, but she has a reputation on the political left for being too conservative. When she was, I know, but it's true. When she was district attorney of San Francisco, she had some very tough on crime policies, which are very unpopular among Democrats. And she continued to do that as the attorney general for California. So a lot of Democrats think she's too far right, which may be incomprehensible to some of your listeners, but it's true. So she's kind of got that problem, which is that when she speaks truthfully, she gets in trouble with people on all sides of the political spectrum. So that's another issue, and might be part of the reason why she gave such non-answers in the past few months.
Well, that's tricky, isn't it? Because if you can't, because then nobody really knows what you stand for.
Exactly.
Now, there'll be many reasons why people vote Democrats or Republican. I've noticed that if I either on YouTube or on X say something like, for example, when JD Vance was on the Joe Rogan show and he talked about gender affirming care being a form of gay medical conversion, all I did was say, I'm thankful that he said it, and straight away people think I'm sort of extreme right-wing lunatic. And it's like, I just said I'm happy he said it. I didn't say I think he's a great guy or that his party is fantastic or that you should vote for Trump. But it seems there's a very black and white thinking going on, that as soon as you say something, people think, oh, you're on board with everything. Similarly, I made a comment, or I asked a question about Michelle Obama, because she did a very passionate speech about abortion rights. And I think she's a very good speaker. She's very charismatic. She really draws you in. And she was so clear in that speech about what a woman is. There was no mistake there. She wasn't talking about abortion rights for female identified people and the non-binary this and the trans that. She didn't use any of that language. And one question I asked was, how can she do such a brilliant speech about that when it was her husband who very much obviously was a president for 8 years, overseeing the dismantling of sex in law and policy. And simply me asking that question again made some people go, oh my God, you're shilling for the right. And it's like, what? It's kind of difficult to just have a normal conversation about these things.
It's very difficult. And this is something that the Democrats do consistently. The women who are the leaders in the Democratic Party know what a woman is. They know that only women need abortions. They know these things. And so when they talk about abortion, they use female specific language because that's the reality of the situation. And then they'll turn around and say something about trans this, trans that, or this, that, and the other. So they do this all the time, and it's very frustrating. But no, you're right. It is very black and white. And JD Vance said some quite sensible things to Joe Rogan. He did. One of the things he said was he thought he and Trump were going to get what he referred to as the normal gay guy vote.
I know, I love that. And then people got all upset about what is a normal gay, and it's like, well,
and you're like,
I'm the ones. Well, I mean, I've always been told I'm weird. Sorry, people have always told me I'm weird. So normal isn't a word that I associate with myself. But then again, I think in this context, a normal gay is someone who doesn't put pronouns in the bio, someone who doesn't call themselves queer, someone who doesn't think, transing kids is a good idea, blah, 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 blah. And I think in a way it's good that we have Republicans talking about normal gays instead of, telling us we're all going to hell and we should repent. I think that's progress in a way.
Yeah. That has been one very interesting thing about this whole thing, is that as conservatives, at least in America, I can't speak to any other country, as conservatives in America increasingly wake up to the harms of what is disgustingly and euphemistically referred to as gender affirming care, they will come to accept their same-sex attracted teenage children because they don't want to trans them. So I agree with you. I think there's a little bit of progress to be made here. And I think it's really good, especially, even though I very much wish Joe Rogan would platform TERFs, I do think it's very good that he had that interview and they sort of talked unsqueamishly about homosexuality, right? They were just talking about normal gay people. And they talked about autogynephilia. And I think it's really good that that gets into the mainstream.
I think that is interesting. And also, hopefully, what it will make people realize is that, all this LGBTQIA, what the fuck is just a myth. And that we're not one homogenous clump of people who agree on everything. And that, yes, actually, there is something as the normies and the crazies. So if this helps to break that up and bring on the so-called divorce I'm all for that.
I think it's so important because one thing a lot of people don't realize is that even though it is, generally speaking, only Republicans in this country who are standing up to trans, conservatives as well as liberals have accepted without criticism or question the idea that transgender is a coherent category of people. So Republicans will say, we don't want transgender athletes to play in women's sports. And,
Right.
you know, I get the sentiment behind that. It's well intended, but they just have to knock it off with the whole TQIA thing completely and realize that it's all just, you know, everything to the right of the B is just a denial of the material reality of sex. And to my dismay, conservatives haven't done that in America, but it's starting to happen.
Okay. So that is quite interesting because they might say, like Trump said, you know, he wants to get the trans insanity out of schools is one of his statements, but they'll still probably think of, as you said, trans as a coherent group of people.
Yeah, I think most Americans across the political spectrum have just accepted without question that concept, which says something about the success of the movement, right? I mean,
oh yes, oh yes. But that's that. I mean, I did a video about this last month called "The Trans Takeover of Womanhood: 100 Years of Madness." Some people think that, you know, everything was going well for the trans movement, and then suddenly, whoa, it went down a crazy path. Whereas my take on it is, it went down the crazy path from the very beginning. The very first man to be legally recognized as a woman was in 1930. And that was with the help of the Danish king, because oppressed. And I think the first woman that I know of who was legally recognized as a man was in 1944 in the UK. And then obviously the mechanism of getting legal recognition has changed over time. But it was always about being recognized as a member of the sex that they were not a member of. It was never about, oh, we'll carve out this other thing for ourselves. It was all, and this is what makes the trans movement different from any other movement that we've ever seen. Like women's liberation wasn't about saying we are actually men, we're not women, and black people didn't go around saying we're not black, we're white. Whereas now we have men saying we are women and women saying we're men. And obviously when they get that legal recognition, which I think in Sweden, that was possible from 1972. So, you know, that's 50 years ago. This has been so long in the making, and it's now that the shit is hitting the fan. And in a way, we're kind of too late sometimes, I think, because all these things are in place. So obviously Trump's won, and he said he wants to tackle, you know, he wants to make sure that women's sport is for women only, get all this gender crap out of schools. Do you think he's actually going to deliver on that?
So I think this comes in part down to a question of the limits of the executive branch, which I think a lot of people don't quite understand. One thing I think he absolutely will do is rescind Executive Order 13988. This is the executive order that Biden signed on the first day of taking office in 2021, which ordered all federal agencies to redefine sex to include so-called gender identity for all purposes under federal administrative law. All federal agencies then did go on and do just that. So I think that he will rescind that executive order, which will be a good thing. Now, in terms of whether he can ban so-called gender-affirming care for kids, comes down, I think, to a question of executive authority. I think that Congress could do that. And I think that they could do that based on Congress's authority under Article 1 of the Constitution. I don't want to get too into that, but I think that Congress could do it. Whether the president can persuade Congress to do it is a different story. Now, my understanding is that the Republicans also won both the House and the Senate. So maybe he can. I don't know. That remains to be seen. But whether he can, with a stroke of his pen, ban it is not at all clear to me. I'm not at all convinced that he has the authority to do that as the executive. Now, whether he can get this stuff out of schools in terms of curriculum, there is actually a lot that the executive branch can do under Title IX. Whether the Department of Education will go along with that remains to be seen. We have the very real problem of the executive rewrite of the Title IX regulations that came around this year and came into effect in August. He does not alone have the authority to undo that. The Department of Education could undo it, but this rewrite of the Title IX regulations took 2 years for the Department of Education. It started in 2022 and ended in April of this year. And if the department is going to undo that, it's going to have to go through that whole process again.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Because it's all well and good saying we're going to root this stuff out, but again, there's only so much you can do within the legal structures, I guess. There's also
and the other problem, of course, is that he's a liar. So,
well, this is it. I've had people say, don't put your faith in this man. I don't think I've ever gone that far that I've put my faith in the man. I was just happy that someone's pushing back, but they could be doing that for all sorts, or saying these things for all sorts of reasons. It remains to be seen, obviously, what he's going to do. When there's so many different reasons why people vote one way or another, and they could vote for the Republicans because it's a protest vote against the Democrats, or they could be agreeing with one of their policies or all of their policies. Who knows? Out of all these possible reasons, and this is hard to quantify, obviously, how much do you think that pushing back against the gender madness has kind of been part of the vote, or was it more about, the price of eggs and the economy and who knows?
I mean, I think there's no question that pushing back against the gender madness was a huge part of this. I do want to say, though, there are a lot of rank and file Democrats and former Democrats who are very angry at the Democratic Party for many reasons. I personally know one woman who left the Democratic Party and became an independent, partly because of gender madness, but possibly more importantly because of free speech. There was a hearing before Congress where Michael Schellenberger and Matt Taibbi were testifying about the Twitter files, and the Democrats in Congress just treated them appallingly. And so this one woman in particular, that's what pushed her over the edge and made her register as an independent. So there's lots of issues going on here, but I am absolutely convinced that the gender madness was a huge part of it.
And this is obviously what your book is about, which is called The Reckoning, How the Left and the Democrats Betrayed Women and Girls. Tell me more about how you came to, obviously you've been in this for as you said, nearly a decade. And it's not the first book you've written, is it?
Right. So in 2021, I published a book called The Abolition of Sex, How the Transgender Agenda Harms Women and Girls. Always have to put transgender in quotes. So that was published in November 2021. And I kept in touch with the publisher. And by early 2023, I don't remember exactly when, but we were having a conversation and he wanted to know what was on my mind. And I said, okay, look, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been yelling at, and I should say, I'm a rank and file Democrat. I have been a registered Democrat my entire life, except a period of time when I was a registered Green. So I'm talking to my own party leadership here. And my answer to him was, I've been doing this a long time. I have been yelling at the Democrat Party leadership for many years now. In 2016, the radical feminist group Women's Liberation Front sued the Obama administration over Obama's policies redefining sex to include gender identity under Title IX. So this has been going on for a long time, and I'm a bit tired. I've quite had it at this point. And I said, I want them to walk it back. I'm sick of it. How many, I worried in early 2023 that they would be able to memory hole this, that they would just kind of stop talking about it. They would quietly just kind of let it go away because they know how unpopular it is. And I didn't want them to be able to do that. So many female athletes have been harmed by their own policies. So many women and girls have had to put up with men being in female-only spaces, often intimate spaces, because of their policies. Thousands of American children have been harmed by puberty blockers, opposite sex hormones, and in many cases, surgeries by their policies. And I didn't want them to be able to get away with just kind of quietly walking it back. No. So I wrote this book and I was telling the publisher, And he said, I love it. I love it. You've got to write this book. And it took a while. It's a long book. It's much longer than my first book. And I did it, and it got published in November 2023, 1 year before the presidential election. And in that book, I was saying, listen, Democrats, you've got a problem. And what you need to do is you need to publicly apologize for throwing women and girls under the bus at the altar of gender identity. You need to earn back the trust of voters. You need to apologize for what you've done, and then we can move on. And the opening, the preface of the book is kind of a letter from me to American Democratic women, where I say, look, I understand this is hard to get your head around. A lot of this is unbelievable. You don't want to believe there are men in prisons, and you don't believe it because the mainstream media won't talk about it. But I'm here to tell you, American women Democrats, the Democrats are not your friends here, and you need to pay attention. And the closing of the book is an afterword. And it is a cautionary tale and a policy prescription where I lay out in no uncertain terms everything that's happened on TERF Island, everything that's happened in other countries, in Australia, in Spain, all the reasons why female voters in particular, but plenty of male supporters like yourself, are leaving the left-leaning parties. So I laid it out and I said, look, if you don't change course, the same thing is going to happen to you. And then I told them exactly what they need to do in terms of rescinding Executive Order 13988, getting rid of the Equality Act in Congress, which we could talk about if you want, but it basically would redefine sex to include gender identity for all purposes under civil rights law. And I just told them to scrap the whole trans agenda, earn back the rights of voters, and get this back on track if they wanted us to vote for them in 2024. And this is what happened.
Yeah, but so there was a plan there. They just had to pay attention to it. And this is one of the challenges. How do we get through to the people in positions of power? And one of the difficulties is, I guess, if you talk about this, people just think you're mad, even though all the evidence is there. And sometimes, you say you're tired. I've been involved in this for 5 years, others much longer, like yourself. And I do wonder, how many Leah Thomases does it take? How many Roxy Tickles will it take? How many Isla Brysons? All these cases are there. And I guess in the States, you have the problem that there's all these different states that also very much do their own thing. And there's only so much that the president can do. One case that's going to come before the Supreme Court, though, is about, I can't remember which state it was, but they banned gender affirming care. Again, I can't talk about trans or gender stuff without the fingers. It's kind of now a part of my muscle memory that my fingers just automatically do that. Totally. But this case, I think the Supreme Court is going to decide on whether that ban was actually within the law or not. So that will hopefully bring a lot of awareness. Because again, we've had the WPATH files. We've had the CAS review. So I do wonder, how much does it take? Because the evidence is all here. And it's the effort that goes into that, and all the hours and the time and the energy and the dedication of so many people. But it's like turning around the Titanic.
It's frustrating. The Supreme Court case you mentioned is called United States versus Skermeti. And this is a case where the state of Tennessee banned so-called puberty blockers, opposite sex hormones, and surgeries for minors. And a bunch of kids and their parents and a doctor sued the state of Tennessee. And they won at the lowest court level, but then they lost at the appellate level, which is the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, in a very, very carefully worded, strong opinion saying that, yes, the state of Tennessee may in fact protect children from harmful hormones and surgeries. And the case is now before the Supreme Court. It was not originally called United States. It was called LW, who's a minor, versus Skermeti. And then the Biden administration intervened as a party. And so now the case is framed as the United States against Skermeti, who's the Attorney General of Tennessee. So oral arguments are scheduled in that case for December 4th. It's going to be a big deal. There are going to be a lot of people there. There are going to be a lot of rallies outside the Supreme Court. And we'll see what happens. I authored a friend of the court brief on behalf of Women's Declaration International USA, arguing that transgender is not a coherent category for the purpose of discrimination on the basis of sex. I don't want to get too into the legal weeds on that, but we argued that the phrase transgender people does not constitute a sufficiently coherent category of people to warrant protection under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. And we also argued that children have an international human right to grow into adults. And our third argument is that sex is grounded in material reality, whereas gender is just a bunch of sex stereotypes that harm women and girls.
Very much. And I would add to that homosexuals as well. But obviously, it's women and girls that suffer.
We make the point very strongly since, I mean, of course, you know, we're aligned, you know, we're in alignment on this issue. But since WDI USA focuses on women and girls, we did very much make the point about lesbians as a subset of women for whom this very much matters.
Well, fair enough. You know, similarly, I'm part of the Gay Men's Network. So we tend to come at this from how does this impact particularly male homosexuals. We always mention the lesbians, and obviously it's part of a bigger picture. But I think the more that you have these very specific organizations, like a women-only one, a lesbian-only one, a gay men-only one that focuses specifically on safeguarding and children, the more that you have these very specific voices, the more you can, hammer down very particular messages. And this is a good thing in terms of what I've seen happen in the UK in the last couple of years, that now there's a whole network of organizations and there's expertise that we can draw from. In the UK, we've had at least 9 cases to do with employment law that have really consolidated rights and freedoms in terms of what you can say and how you should be protected at work for simply saying that a woman is an adult human female. I mean, again, it's absolutely nuts that it's got to that point. This morning, actually, we had some good news that Ros Adams, who took on Edinburgh Rape Crisis Centre, she's been awarded, I think, £70,000 in damages, or 90,000 even, something in that area, which is huge. And Edinburgh Rape Crisis Centre have to apologize and to acknowledge that she never came from a place of transphobia. So it's a win, but at what cost? And how, again, it just shows taking something on like that legally is huge. And it can take such a toll on a person, you know. That's why I'm sure there's more cases or potential cases where people just went, I can't hack it. It's too much.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, we'll all look back on this time and wonder how on earth we got here. But here we are. And so do the work we'll do. Yeah.
And you do that. Like, obviously, you've written 2 books, but you're heavily involved with Women's Declaration International, and you're on the street with signs and banners and a megaphone and spreading the word.
Hello, San Francisco! We are so happy to be here, to stand up for lesbians.
So I want to thank you very much for all that hard work that you put into it, because it's all hands on deck.
Yeah. You know, sometimes people ask me, you know, how it feels to be doing all of this. And it's just interesting because I was never fired from a job because of my advocacy on this, but I did lose a career because of it, because my last official job, it had to do with criminal justice. People don't know this, but I spent nearly 20 years working on criminal law and criminal justice. My first job as a lawyer was as a public defender. And then I spent almost 20 years working essentially to fix the American criminal justice system, which is a problem. And in 2019, during a non-work day, I appeared on a panel called The Inequality of the Equality Act, Concerns from the Left. And someone, I will never know who, someone found out about that and took a screenshot and tweeted a member of the Washington, D.C. City Council and said, why is a TERF? I was working for the city government at the time. And so this person on X tweeted or, posted at the city council member saying, why is there a TERF serving in the DC city government? And that city council member got quite angry and took it up with my boss, who was very confused because she was probably in her late 60s. She doesn't understand this issue at all. Again, the agency where I was working had to do with criminal justice. It didn't have anything to do with sex and gender. And she doesn't understand how Twitter works. So she had no idea what was going on. I felt really bad for her. And then I kept my job for a while, but over time, she just kept receiving anonymous email messages from people who were yelling at her about a TERF working at the agency. And I didn't want to put her through that. And at that point, I was just like, all right. So I quit my job. I decided at that moment that I could either keep my job or I can keep my job and shut up about sex and gender, or I could quit my job. And so that's what I did. So I haven't had a real career since 2019, but that's fine with me. So when people ask me what I do, I say that I'm a full-time unemployed TERF, which is basically what I am, and my thinking about it is that if the so-called and I should say, I used to work at the ACLU. A lot of people know that, but many people don't. You didn't know that. So yeah, I was senior counsel at the ACLU on criminal justice policy until 2014. And so my thinking now is if the so-called progressive criminal justice reform community doesn't want to use my legal and public speaking skills to further their movement, I am more than happy to put those skills to use for women and girls.
Right. And is there in your book, you've outlined ways for the Democrats to change course. The damage that is done, it's going to take some time to heal, though, won't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just the damage that has been done, for example, to Peyton McNabb. For anyone who does not know, Peyton McNabb was a high school student, and she was on her girls' volleyball team, and they had a male player on the opposing team. He spiked the ball right into her head. She suffered a concussion, and she still hasn't recovered. That was over a year ago now. And she still hasn't recovered. How many Peyton McNabbs are out there? I don't know. But yeah, so real concrete harm. Of course, we have the Wee Spa case where a 9-year-old girl had to see a man walking around in the spa with his erect penis. And, countless damage has been done by this. So there's material harms that have to be healed from. But in terms of getting gender identity out of the law, which is the heart of the mission of Women's Declaration International, that's just going to take a lot of work.
Yes. And I do wonder, because this is so much bigger than politics. It's much bigger than this party or that party or this president. Whoever has vested interests in this is not just going to go, all right, well, the TERFs have won. We'll just, throw in the towel and go home. They'll obviously be looking at, okay, what else can we do, or how do we change tech? And in a way, it's already so embedded in the law. That's what we're now seeing. That's why, I think this month in the UK, we're going to have a case where For Women Scotland is going to the Supreme Court here, or the High Court, about how the Scottish government try to redefine the meaning of woman. Or it's about how the Equality Act interacts with a gender recognition certificate here in the UK. All these things are unclear. Obviously, in Australia, we've had Roxy Tickle versus Sal Grover. There were the lesbians, I think the Lesbian Action Group that took, was it Victoria, the state of Victoria? I don't know if it's local or state level, where they took legal action so they can have their own public lesbian events. It's like it's got so far, and there's such a big beast behind that isn't just going to go, okay, never mind, we'll do something else.
I want to just say, I saw your reply to Matt Walsh on X, where he said, great, this is done, right? And you were like,
yeah, this was the knockout blow.
You're like, no, Matt Walsh.
No.
So thank you for that.
And it's going to take more. Obviously, his documentary was fantastic, although it was very much a conservative man's documentary, and it still, was very much about, oh, girls are girly and pink, and boys need to do, I don't know, go fishing. And then he moved on and made his racism or anti-racism movie. So with some of these men, I feel like, oh, they take something, they think, oh, I've done my bit now, move on, next. When this is a long game, and as you say, you've been in this nearly 10 years in a myriad of ways, and we got to keep going. What are your hopes for the next 4 years of a Trump presidency?
Well, right now I'm looking at the Scrimetti case, and again, the oral arguments on December 4th. Most people who follow this case think that the Supreme Court is going to rule in support of Tennessee. What I think will be very interesting is how the three so-called liberals on the court vote, because if most likely they will vote against Tennessee. But if any of them writes a dissenting opinion, they're going to have to come up with a way to explain why the phrase transgender people is a coherent category that ought to be protected under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. And I just don't know how they're going to manage to do that. In the WDI USA brief in support of Tennessee, we quote the ACLU and the Human Rights Campaign's own definitions of transgender to explain why even they can't define transgender in any kind of coherent way.
Yeah.
So it was sort of one of the highlights of my career, using my former employer's own definition of transgender against it in a brief. Well, so that's what I'm looking to right now. In terms of what to expect over the next 4 years, I don't know. We'll have to see. I do think, as I said, that Trump will rescind Executive Order 13988, which I think is a very important first step. And, we'll just keep doing what we do, which is continue to sound the drumbeat about women and girls as a sex class and about protecting children. But as of today, it's way too early to think about what that might look like more concretely.
Yes. And what are your worries and your fears about him in the White House for 4 years?
Well, as I said, I don't think he's fit to serve in the Oval Office at all, which is why I didn't vote for him in 2016. Well, that's not the only reason I didn't vote for him in 2016, but I didn't vote for him in 2016. I didn't vote for him in 2020. I didn't vote for him yesterday, and I don't intend ever to vote for him. And I think it's anyone's guess what's going to happen. I don't know if he's going to come up with more crazy things like, banning immigrants or all of the crazy stuff that he did back in 2017. I just don't know. He's nothing if not unpredictable. So we'll see. But I do want to say to the point that you were making about this being a long game. A long time ago, I had a conversation with America's, I don't know, most popular or least popular commentator, depending on who you're talking to, Tucker Carlson. Okay. And I told him that I had attended a rally at the Supreme Court during the oral arguments in Dobbs, which is the case that overturned Roe v. Wade. And I was, of course, there on the pro Roe v. Wade side. And those of us who were there let me just pause to say, we were there pro Roe v. Wade, but we held very TERFy signs that said only women need abortions and abortion is a women's sex-based right. So we were there to make a point on our own side.
Yeah.
So we made that point. And then we went into the anti-Roe side just to see what would happen. And the predictable things happened. They called us witches and they said we're going to hell and all of those things. But then some group on the anti-Roe side started chanting, trans rights start at conception. So that was fascinating because that's a riff on the traditional conservative anti-abortion chant, human rights start at conception. That's what the anti-abortion people say. One of the things. And this group of people was saying trans rights start at conception. And I was like, well, that's new. This was sort of an anti-abortion pro-trans chant. And I told Tucker Carlson this, and he was like, all right. He was like, the political right is now prime real estate for the gender industry. That was his phrase. And so my worry is that the gender industry, we haven't even talked about the whole industry behind the gender madness,
Yeah.
But the industry, which is very well funded, I worry that they will now buy the political right in the way that they have already bought the political left.
Right. Which is okay, because when I thought they're not going to just roll over and go home, I thought, what could they do next? But I guess that's quite a chilling idea.
That's what I worry about.
Yeah. What do you think the Democrats will do while they're still in power?
That's a great question. I don't know. I don't know. It's all just so unpredictable. I mentioned the Equality Act.
Mm-hmm.
The Equality Act in the US is very different from the Equality Act in the UK, in that, as much as I don't like it, that the UK Equality Act protects gender, I always forget whether it's gender recognition or gender reassignment.
Gender reassignment, which is a very vague, very nebulous concept, even in the Equality Act in the UK, because it just says all you have to do is state that you have an intention to change gender. And again, gender itself is kind of undefined.
Yeah. So your Equality Act protects gender reassignment, which is bad, and I don't like it, but it also protects sex as a discrete category.
Yes.
The US's Equality Act would completely redefine the word sex to include gender identity for all purposes throughout US civil rights law. It has been around since 2015. It has passed in the House of Representatives twice. It has never gone to the Senate for a floor vote, but if it did, it would be absolutely devastating. And that's one thing the Democrats could do as a parting shot at women and girls, would be to push through the so-called Equality Act.
Wow, that would be quite a parting shot, wouldn't it?
I don't think they can do it, because I think if they could do it, they would already have done it.
Yeah.
The majority leader, who's a man named Charles Schumer, who nobody's heard of, but is arguably the most powerful person in the United States, he had the authority to do it throughout 2021 and 2022, and he didn't do it. And I think it's because he didn't have the votes to do it, which says something about what the Democrats think behind the scenes. Anyway, the Equality Act was reintroduced in 2023, but it hasn't gone anywhere, and most people don't think it will go anywhere. So I don't think the Democrats have the votes to get it through. But if they really wanted to take a parting shot at women and girls, that's one thing they could push.
Right. And if they don't, does that mean it's dead and buried? Or could it be resurrected again at some point?
Yeah, if they don't, it'll be dead again at the end of this year. And then possibly the Democrats will reintroduce it in 2025.
Right. And what you said about how the Equality Act would redefine sex, this is what's happened already in the Netherlands years ago. I think it was 2014 when we had an update to what colloquially is known as the transgender law. That's not the name of the actual article, but it's in the Constitution, and it talks about how you can legally change your sex marker. And it's always, even by calling it the transgender law, it makes it sound like it just applies to a small group of people in the gender corner over there. But it redefines sex as a legal concept entirely, and therefore it affects every citizen. And we also have an anti-discrimination law, which was updated in 2019, where sex as a protected characteristic now also includes gender identity, gender expression, sex characteristic. So if you have a man with a beard and a penis in a woman's changing room in a gym, and he is legally recognized as female, then as a woman, you cannot say, there's a man, because legally he's female. And if you then say, but she has got a penis, well, that's a sex characteristic and you can't discriminate on that. But she has a beard, that's a sex characteristic. Or, whatever, if he just wears men's clothes, that's gender expression. So there's no way out. And we had a case a few years ago where a bloke was insisting on using the women's changing room in a gym, which is part of a big chain of gyms. And even though they knew that he was trans, but for some reason they knew that he still had a penis. I don't know how, but they knew that, and they said, we want to keep the women's changing room penis free. That was their goal.
But you get these men and they're just so, these are the most awful of men. It's nothing will stop them and they must have everything. It's like that Morgan Auger guy in Canada who goes after a rape shelter because nothing is nothing is sacred. It's like they go after everything. They must have it all. So this guy goes, I want to go to the women's changing room. And they said, well, you can't, but you can use the women's toilet because that was like a single unit, single space. Obviously, okay. So in Holland, we have an expression that if you're pissed off or pissed, as you would say, we ask, did somebody step on your dick? So the trans woman felt like somebody had stepped on his dick. Anyways, Dutch language is wonderful. So he complained, and management agreed with the team member that had initially said, you can use the women's toilet. Then he went to some anti-discrimination service, and they got in touch with the gym and said, this isn't good enough. You have to offer a better solution because you're discriminating. So then the gym said, oh, well, okay, you can use the staff locker room, but you can't go into the women's changing room because we want to keep it penis free. Again, that wasn't good enough. So then he went to, it's an institution that we call the College of Human Rights. It's not a college as in a place where you go to school. It's more like a commission for human rights. And they looked at it and they came out with this judgment, which now if they had said a trans woman is discriminated against on the basis of her gender identity, it kind of would have made sense to me. But this is what they said. And by the time it got to them, he had changed his legal sex marker to female. So their judgment was a woman was discriminated against by the gym on the basis of her female sex.
Right.
And how do you roll that back?
We've got to get these laws amended.
Right. And then, so I wonder now, I'm going to do an interview with Michael Foran, hopefully soon, to look at it from a UK law perspective, because obviously the law is different in all these different countries. And how does this interact with international law and things like CEDAW, for example?
Sure.
And what obligations does that place on governments? I just wanted to ask you about one other thing, which was your appearance on Dr. Phil. And he's kind of come out swinging for our side, if you like. How did that come about that you appeared on his show?
His producers emailed me. And I kind of sat there staring at that email invitation, and we had a phone call, and it was very productive. It was very friendly. They wanted to have me on. And it was a little bit funny because I had a few phone calls with the producers. And at one point I was on the phone with the head producer, and she said, I cannot find anyone willing to come on the show to debate you. And that made me laugh.
Wow.
So they eventually found one man, who wore a flowery dress and a big obnoxious wig, and and a woman who calls herself a non-binary dad because she was pregnant while on testosterone.
Oh my
and
God.
had a baby and now calls herself a non-binary dad. So the show found those two people who were willing to come on. I was on, and there were a couple other women sort of on our side of the issue. And it was fascinating. I didn't really like the show format. I didn't think it really lent itself to a lot of productive conversations, but some really good things came out of it.
And there was a clip that I saw where somebody said, well, you're being challenged, basically. And I think they were sort of trying to catch you out for not believing that men who believe themselves to be women are actual women. And I think you used the phrase all women. And then they went, what? So also trans women? And you just went, no, not men.
All women are welcome to join the movement.
Do you mean trans women are welcome to join the movement?
I don't mean men. I mean women.
So you think trans women are men?
It's not a matter of opinion. We're talking about the material reality of biological sex, which is grounded in science and reality.
It was really interesting because this man who was there wearing his dress and his wig, he kept like pointing at me in this really aggressive way. And it's very useful when they do that, because then we can just sort of sit back and be very calm and make our very calm, articulate arguments about why sex is real. And meanwhile, the so-called trans side is like behaving in this very male, aggressive manner. And the other thing that he kept doing, which I thought was very funny, is he kept accusing me of talking about reality. And he would do that. He would put reality in air quotes. Yeah. And he would say things like, why do you insist on talking about reality? And I was like, well, what do you mean? Yeah. So that was great. And I think it helped. I think it helped pique Dr. Phil. And I guess I would just say, I don't think it was the arguments that I made that piqued Dr. Phil. I think it was this man's own aggressive behavior and absolute nonsense that piqued Dr. Phil. At one point, Dr. Phil said to him, you know, if you're trying to make your case, you might want to do it a little bit less aggressively.
Okay. Okay. Well, this is always it, isn't it? It's like Project Let Them Speak.
Exactly.
And not just the aggression, but also the so-called arguments that they have. Because if you're going to put reality in quotation marks, then again, this is the whole thing about, oh, nothing's real, everything's a social construct. And just at the end of that clip, somebody goes, oh, but sex and gender is different.
But sex and gender are different.
Women are.
Which is sort of their go-to. Well, it's not an argument, is it? Because if sex and gender are different, then that's exactly why trans women are men. Duh.
Yeah. I don't understand why anyone thinks any of this makes sense. But it is helpful to it's helpful to people who are just waking up to this issue to remind them that they're not the crazy ones. Because I've had so many people say to me, Kara, I am trying to make sense of this and it doesn't make sense. And I will say to them, you're trying to make sense out of something that does not make sense. Don't worry. You're not the crazy person here. You've got it right. And that often helps people realize that, yeah, this is just as batshit as it seems.
Yeah. And this is one of the, I guess the main feedback that I get from people is when they say they watch my videos, it helps them stay sane or helps them realize that they're not the ones who've lost their minds. And I mean, before I started doing anything, I spent a good year looking at this because I was like, am I missing something? Like, what? No, but sure. Huh? But I really wanted to have a good grasp of the issues, if you like, before, you know, coming out all guns blazing, as I like to do with most things that I tackle. But yeah, it's they come out with all these stupid arguments. They go round and round in circles until you're either bored and tired and you leave, or your head hurts, or you start doubting yourself. And I saw a really good quote. I can't remember it now off the top of my head. I only saw it yesterday, so I'll put that in this video. But I saw this really good quote that actually explained how intelligence gets in the way when it comes to this topic. There are some ideas so absurd that only an intellectual could believe them. No ordinary man could be such a fool. If you're clever, you can find all sorts of clever reasons to justify something. But this whole thing about, yeah, it's not us that's gone crazy. Yeah. I think that's one of our core messages when we speak to people.
Yep.
And don't feel bad about thinking that it's crazy, because it is absolutely fucking nuts. And I wish that after 5 years, I had something more eloquent to say about it. But hopefully, now that Trump has been elected, we'll see some positive changes.
We'll see.
All we can do is keep our eyes peeled and be on the case, like you are with that Supreme Court case in December, for example. So, is there anything else that you want to add?
The one final thing I would add is some devastating news from the election last night that might not have got picked up on outside the United States, is that in New York State, Proposition 1 succeeded. It passed. And the reason that is so bad is that the proponents call it an abortion rights measure, and it constitutionalizes prohibition against discrimination on the basis of pregnancy, which is a good thing. But it also puts in the New York State Constitution a prohibition on discrimination on the basis of gender identity. So it's absolutely devastating. I am certain that countless New York women flocked to the polls to vote for this, thinking they were voting for a pro-abortion measure, when really what they voted for was allowing men to enter their daughters' public space, public bathrooms and toilets and whatnot. So that's absolutely devastating. I'm sorry to end on a bad note, but I did just want to share that.
Well, it's important because it's important to know, because so many of these things are sneaked in. The same with self-ID in Ireland was sneaked in on the back of, gay marriage. Because if they were to put the whole gender identity thing to a vote on its own, it would fail because it can't stand on its own two legs. So, and especially with abortion being such a hotly debated topic, I just find it so sneaky how they take an issue like that, knowing how people feel about it, to push through something so damaging. But again, that's why we have to keep our eyes peeled constantly and looking at all these different pieces of legislation that are being tabled and put to a vote. And thankfully, you are there, and Women's Declaration International is there, as are other organizations, specifically to look at the legal side of things. So I want to thank you very much for what it's worth, for all that you do, and your endurance.
Thank you for all your wonderful videos. Just getting back to what we were talking about, I published The Reckoning in November 2023 to tell the Democrats to walk it back, to apologize, to get rid of this gender identity nonsense if it wanted to earn the trust of the voters, and they didn't do it. And this is what happened.
I keep having that Supreme song in my head, The Happening. The Happening, but then obviously it goes, The Reckoning, do do do, now I see life. Anyways, where can people find you?
You can find me on X at Kara Dansky, also Facebook, Kara Dansky, and on Substack, karadansky.substack.com, where I write about all things gender identity in the United States.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for coming on at such short notice. Thank you for all the work that you've done and that you're doing. And we'll keep an eye out on that Supreme Court case.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Ciao. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to my PayPal and Patreon supporters. Because of you, I can make videos like this. Special shout out to my big spenders. Help Her Open, Mama TERF and the Turvantines, me Julie, the lovely Mary, Julia, Dusty, Judels, Leffy, Dorothy, Wildfire, Esther, and Martha. Thank you.
Women are female and men are male, and it's okay to say that.